The cold land stretched for miles in every direction, and the wind moved across the frozen ground like a living thing. It was the kind of place where silence felt thick, where a person could walk for hours and never see another soul. In this remote corner of Iceland, only the cracking of ice and the distant sound of the ocean reminded anyone that the world was still awake. Researcher moved slowly across this lonely land, carrying a small pack, watching his steps so he would not slip on the hard ice. He had come to this frozen area many times before, studying the strange patterns in the geology and the unusual temperature drops that had been reported. Most people avoided this part of the coast, especially in winter, but he had always felt comfortable in places where others felt uneasy. The stillness helped him think. The empty space made him feel calm. But that day, something felt different. The air seemed heavier. The sky looked dim even though the sun had already risen. As he walked, he noticed a set of deep marks in the snow, long lines pressed into the ground as if something extremely heavy had been dragged across the ice. He stopped and looked around. At first, he assumed it might be a piece of equipment that someone dropped long ago, or maybe a natural shift in the ice. But the marks were too smooth and too deliberate. They had direction, purpose. He followed them slowly, taking careful steps. His breath left soft clouds in front of him, but he barely noticed. The lines grew deeper and wider the further he walked. Something large had been here, something that struggled. A part of him felt he should turn back. Another part, stronger and more curious, kept pushing him forward. As he reached a rise in the snow, he froze in place. His eyes widened. Below him, in a hollow created by the wind and the shape of the land, he saw them, huge bodies covered in frost and snow, shapes that did not belong to this world. Long necks curled toward the ground, wings folded tightly against their sides, tails stiff from ice. At first, he thought they were statues, maybe some strange art installation, placed by someone with a strange sense of creativity. But statues did not shiver. Statues did not breathe. Statues did not groan in pain. These creatures were alive. They looked like dragons, though he had never believed such beings could exist in real life. Their scales, though dulled by frost, had a faint shimmer. Their chests rose and fell weakly. Their breath came out as thin mist, and around their legs and wings were strange metallic bands, part buried in ice, holding them tightly to the ground. He stood completely still, his heart beating faster with every second. He had seen unusual things before, rare animals in the wild, strange natural formations, but nothing like this. The creatures were so massive that each one could easily overshadow a car. But they were not moving much. They were too weak even to lift their heads properly. They had been here for a long time. At first, he was afraid. Anyone would be. These creatures looked powerful, even now, when they were clearly at their lowest point. But then he noticed something odd. None of them reacted aggressively to him. They did not hiss, growl, or try to escape. Instead, they simply watched him with tired, slow blinks, as if they were too exhausted to care who he was, or what he might do. He took a slow step forward, then another. The crunch of snow under his boots echoed loudly in the silent hollow. One of the dragons made a small sound, a soft, low note, not threatening, but almost like a plea for help. The sound pushed something inside him, something human and instinctive. They were suffering. They had been suffering for days, maybe weeks. He walked closer, his breath quickening as he studied the bindings. The metal bands looked alien, not like anything made on Earth. They had strange patterns running along them, and seemed to tighten when the creatures tried to move. Whoever put these restraints here must have wanted these beings immobilized. But why bring them to Iceland? Why leave them here to freeze? He knelt carefully, making sure he stayed out of reach of their claws and tails. Even in their condition, He knew he had to respect the danger they could pose. But the closer he looked, the more he saw how hopeless their situation was. The ice around their bodies had grown thick, forming a prison within a prison. Their wings looked stiff and heavy from the cold. Their breathing was slow. Too slow. He reached out with one gloved hand, but stopped himself just before touching the nearest dragon. Not because of fear, but out of respect. Touching a creature like this without its permission felt wrong somehow. The dragon opened one eye, a glowing, faintly blue eye that looked impossibly sad. There was no anger in that gaze. Only exhaustion. Only surrender. The researcher took a long breath. He felt the weight of the moment. He was alone here. No team. No backup. No one to confirm what he was seeing. If he told anyone, they might laugh. If he took pictures, people might claim they were fake. If he called for help, authorities might come. And what would they do? Would they panic? Would they harm the creatures out of fear? Most importantly, did these beings even have time left? He walked around the group, slowly studying each one. There were 3 of them, all bound, all in the same fading condition. One seemed smaller than the others, maybe younger. Its breathing was the weakest. He felt something unfamiliar in his chest, a pull, a responsibility. He had never imagined he would feel compassion for something that looked like it belonged in legends. But suffering did not belong to one species. Pain was universal. Weakness was universal. And kindness was a choice. The wind grew stronger, pushing snow across the land and gusting over the already frozen creatures. He wiped the snow from his jacket and moved closer to the one nearest him. His instincts screamed caution, but his humanity refused to step back. He studied the metal band around its foreleg. The material felt cold, even through his gloves. It was smooth, almost too smooth, like something that came from a place far more advanced than anything on Earth. He could not understand how it worked, but he understood the result. These creatures could not move because of it. The dragon let out a soft, weak breath when he touched the restraint. It did not pull away. It did not try to harm him. It simply accepted that someone was there, someone who at least acknowledged its suffering. He stood up again and looked around the silent hollow. Snowflakes drifted slowly down, collecting on the creatures' backs. They did not shake them off. They were too tired. He realized then how long they must have been here. The storms, the freezing nights, the hunger. And still they had survived this long. But they had reached their limit. They were barely holding on now. He wondered what they were thinking. Did they understand him? Did they see him as a threat or as a final chance? Or maybe they had stopped expecting anything at all. Maybe they had already accepted that this frozen land would be their final place. He could not speak to them, not in their language, not in any shared form of communication, but he felt strongly that they had given up hope long before he arrived. They did not expect rescue. They did not expect mercy. They simply waited for the cold to finish what time had started. He walked back a few steps, trying to gather his thoughts. The cold wind chilled his face, but his mind was spinning too fast to notice. Every idea clashed with another. Every fear battled with the need to act. He knew one thing for certain. If he walked away now, these creatures would not survive. He had not come here seeking adventure. He had not planned to become a savior. But life does not always ask what someone plans to do. Sometimes it simply places a moment in front of them and waits to see what kind of person they choose to be. He looked once more at the dragons, 3 massive beings trapped on ice, breathing weakly, eyes dim and tired. Their fate hung in silence, fragile and fading, and he understood that he could not leave them like this. He took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs, and stepped closer again, this time with purpose. He would find a way. He did not know how. He did not know what dangers waited for him. But he knew the simple truth. Someone had to try. The days that followed felt strangely heavy, as if the frozen land itself carried a story too big for one person to hold. The researcher kept returning to the hollow where the dragons lay. Each morning he forced himself through the cold wind, carrying supplies he hoped might help them. He was careful, always alert, always watching their reactions, but he could not ignore the condition they were in. They were fading, little by little, almost like the light during long winter nights. The first few days, he kept his distance. He only watched them from a safe spot, trying to understand how they behaved, how they braved, and how their bodies reacted to the cold. He noticed that their movements were slow, not because they were dangerous or waiting to attack, but because they had almost no strength left. Their wings barely twitched. Their heads lowered more each day. Their breaths came out as thin clouds that dissolved in the cold. He had seen injured animals before, while traveling through remote lands, but this felt different. These beings did not behave like animals. They behaved like something older, something intelligent, something that understood suffering and time in ways humans could not imagine. Every hour he spent near them changed something inside him. At first, he was afraid. Then he became curious. After that, he felt responsible. Not because he believed he was a hero or someone special, but because there was simply no one else there. No one else even knew they existed. And he could not just pretend he had seen nothing. During one afternoon, when the clouds hung low and the wind pulled at his clothes, he approached them again with a small container of warm water he had managed to heat inside a portable flask. He knew the dragons needed more than that, but it was all he could carry safely through the icy landscape. He moved carefully, watching the largest dragon, whose eyes always followed him with quiet awareness. When he got close, he placed the water container on the snow a short distance away. He did not try to force anything. He simply let the creature see what he brought. The dragon blinked slowly, then lowered its head even more. For a long moment, nothing happened. But then, with a small, trembling movement, it stretched its neck enough to reach the container. The dragon's tongue gently touched the warm water, and steam rose into the cold air. The researcher held his breath. He had never imagined a moment like this. A moment where a creature he once believed existed only in stories would drink water he had brought. Trusting that it was safe, the dragon drank only a little before lifting its head again, too weak to continue. But that small action changed everything. It meant the creature still had the will to survive, even if only barely. The next day, he brought more water. The day after that, he brought a small amount of food, simple things he hoped their bodies could tolerate. He had no idea what dragons ate, but he tried to choose items that were soft, warm, and easy to swallow. He placed everything on the snow again, never forcing them, never stepping too close. The smallest dragon, the one whose breathing worried him the most, did not move at first. But on the fourth day of his visits, its eyes opened just enough to show a soft glow. It lifted its head only a few inches, struggling, trembling, but trying. That tiny movement broke something inside him. It showed him how hard they were fighting to stay alive, even when the cold and hunger pressed against them like an endless weight. He realized then how lonely they must have felt before he found them. Stranded on ice, tied down by strange metal, unable to move, with no idea if anyone would come. For weeks they had stared at the same sky, the same storms, the same frozen emptiness. They must have wondered if their lives would end there, in a place where no one spoke their language and no one understood their suffering. The researcher often sat on a rock at the edge of the hollow, watching them breathe. There was something haunting about their quietness, something heartbreaking. They had accepted their fate long before he arrived. They had stopped expecting rescue and stopped hoping for help. They had simply waited for the cold to decide their final hour. And yet, despite everything, they still showed a strange calmness whenever he was near. He could not explain it, but they always watched him with the same tired but peaceful eyes, as if they understood he meant no harm. At night, when he returned to his small camp, he could not stop thinking about them. He would sit inside his tent, with the wind rattling the fabric, and replay every moment in his mind. He wondered where they had come from, why they had been brought here, who had tied them with those strange restraints, and why no one else knew. Sometimes he imagined the dragons before they were captured flying freely in some distant world, maybe with a sky full of colors no human had ever seen. He wondered if they had families somewhere, waiting for them to return. He wondered if those families believed they were gone forever. Each morning he woke up before sunrise, driven by something stronger than fear. He did not tell himself he was saving them. He only told himself he was trying. Trying was something he could do. Trying was something a human could offer. Even when the situation felt impossible. As the days passed, he noticed small changes. The dragons moved slightly more. Their eyes stayed open longer. They reacted when he approached, not with fear, but with a quiet kind of recognition. The biggest dragon sometimes turned its head in his direction before he even reached the hollow, as if it sensed his footsteps from far away, but their condition was still dangerous. Their wings were locked tightly under layers of ice. Their legs looked stiff. The restraints cut into their skin whenever they shifted. They needed more than food and water. They needed freedom. And they needed warmth. One afternoon, when the sun cast long shadows over the ice, he brought a blanket of heated cloth. It was bulky and difficult to carry through the wind, but he managed. He placed it near the smallest dragon, hoping the warmth would spread enough to make a difference. The dragon opened its eyes slowly and breathed out, a soft sound, not loud, not frightening, but almost like a sigh of relief. The researcher felt a strange warmth inside his chest. He had never thought a creature so large and powerful could produce a sound so gentle. He stayed with them for hours that day. He talked quietly, even though he knew they could not understand his words. But speaking to them felt natural. It made the frozen world feel less empty. He told them they were not alone anymore. He told them he would keep coming. He told them he would try everything he could to help them, even though they could not answer. Their eyes seemed to soften whenever he spoke. As the cold winds swept across the hollow, he noticed how harsh the storms had been on their bodies. Ice formed on their scales every night. Their breath sometimes came out shaky. And each time he saw this, something inside him tightened. He could not imagine how much they had suffered before he found them. He could not imagine how many nights they spent staring at the frozen sky, waiting for an end. He knew he could not delay any longer. They needed real help. They needed someone willing to risk everything to free them from the metal bands. But before he could act, he needed to understand the restraints better. So he spent long hours studying the strange metal. It hummed faintly when touched. It had symbols on it that did not match any language on Earth. It felt like an object from another world, crafted with knowledge far beyond human understanding. And yet, it held these dragons captive on a planet not their own. The researcher sat on the snow, the cold biting at his legs, trying to think. If he made a mistake, he could hurt the dragons. If he failed, their chance of survival would disappear. He looked at the three creatures again. Their eyes glowed softly in the dim light, full of exhaustion, but also something new, something that had not been there the first time he saw them. Hope. And that single spark changed everything. He stood up, brushing snow off his coat. He did not know how he would do it yet. He did not know how long it would take. But he knew he would try to free them. Not because he wanted recognition or proof for the world, but because he could not abandon beings who had accepted their fate and still found the strength to trust him. He looked at them one last time before heading back to camp. The dragons watched him leave, their eyes following him until he disappeared behind the snowy ridge. They knew he would return, and he knew this was only the beginning of the battle to save them. The sky was still dark when he stepped outside his tent the next morning. The cold bit into his skin the way it always did, sharp and unfriendly, but he barely noticed now. His mind was too full, too busy thinking about the challenge ahead of him. The dragons had survived several days with the water and warmth he brought, but they were still trapped. Food and comfort were not enough. What they needed was freedom, and he had no idea how to give it to them. He walked across the ice, carrying tools that clinked softly inside his backpack with every step. He didn't know if they would work. They were simple tools, things used for camping, repairs, and emergencies. Nothing special, nothing powerful, nothing designed to break alien restraints. But he still brought them because he had to start somewhere. Doing nothing was no longer an option. When he reached the hollow, he paused at the edge to catch his breath. The snow was falling lightly, making the dragons appear even more still, almost like frozen statues again. But as soon as he stepped closer, the largest dragon lifted its head slightly, recognizing him. The smallest one shifted its tail just a little, as if greeting him. These small changes gave him strength. They showed him that his presence mattered, that he had become their only connection to life. He knelt beside the metal band wrapped around one dragon's leg. The metal was strangely smooth, without even a single scratch. It glowed faintly under the snow, almost as if it had a life of its own. He touched it with gloved fingers and felt a soft vibration. The metal was cold, but not the kind of cold that came from winter. It felt like something deeper, something unnatural. He tried using a small hammer first, hitting the band lightly to test how it responded. The sound echoed, sharp and strange, but nothing changed. The band didn't move, didn't bend, didn't even show a single mark. It was like hitting a mountain with a feather. He frowned and tried a metal tool with a sharp edge. Again, the moment he pressed it against the restraint, the tool simply slipped off, leaving no sign that he had even tried. The dragons watched him quietly with tired eyes. They didn't struggle. They didn't panic. They simply observed, trusting him more than they trusted themselves. He felt a knot form in his chest. If these tools didn't work, what would? He reached into his pack and pulled out a portable heating device. It was something he used to warm frozen equipment during storms. He placed it against the metal band and turned it on. The device hummed softly as heat flowed out. Steam rose from the snow, forming a thin white mist around him and the dragon's leg. He waited, hoping the heat would weaken the metal, but when he touched it again, he felt nothing different. The band was still strong, solid, and cold in its strange way. The dragon let out a slow sound, almost like a sigh. Not angry, not scared, just tired of waiting, tired of suffering, tired of being trapped. He closed his eyes for a moment and whispered, "I'm trying. I won't stop." Even if they didn't understand his words, they seemed to understand the meaning behind them. After several hours of attempting different methods, he finally sat down on the snow, breathing hard. The cold pressed against him, but he didn't care. His hands felt numb, his tools were scattered around him, and nothing had changed. But giving up wasn't something he let himself consider. He leaned closer to study the metal again. This time, he noticed something he had missed before. Along the edge of the band was a faint pattern, a series of small symbols etched into the material. They were delicate, almost invisible under the frost. He brushed the snow away and stared at them. The symbols didn't look like any language he had ever seen. They curved and twisted in unusual ways, forming a design that felt both artistic and purposeful. He ran his finger along them, and for a brief moment, the band reacted. A soft pulse of light moved through the symbols, glowing blue for a second before fading again. He froze. He tried again, pressing a little harder. The symbols glowed once more, faint but noticeable. This meant something. Maybe the restraints reacted to touch. Maybe they weren't meant to be broken with force. Maybe they required a sequence or a certain kind of pressure. He studied the symbols for a long time, trying to understand their pattern. He didn't know how to read them, but he did know how to observe. And he noticed that some symbols looked deeper than others, almost like they could be pressed. He touched one lightly. Nothing happened. He pressed a different one. Again, nothing changed. But when he pressed two symbols at the same time, the band gave off a soft hum, like something inside it had awakened. He felt a sudden rush of hope. He moved slowly, carefully pressing combinations of symbols. Some did nothing. Others caused a faint ripple of light along the band. The dragons watched closely, their eyes more alert now, as if they sensed that something important was happening. He pressed a sequence of 3 symbols that seemed connected by their shape. A brief vibration passed through the metal. The restraint loosened slightly, not much, but enough for him to notice. His heart slammed in his chest. It was working. He looked up at the largest dragon. Its eyes glowed faintly. It understood. It trusted him. He wiped snow from the band and pressed the symbols again, more confidently this time. The hum grew louder. The metal shifted, unlocking a little more. He kept going, pressing the patterns carefully, one by one, memorizing which combinations caused the strongest reactions. Minutes passed. Then hours. His fingers felt stiff from the cold. His breath fogged the air, and the sky darkened as daylight slowly disappeared again. But he did not stop. He couldn't. The dragons had waited for weeks. He could at least push through one long night. At last, after pressing a final set of symbols that glowed brighter than any before, the band released with a soft click. The metal loosened around the dragon's leg, and the creature let out a sound deep. Soft breath that felt like relief. The leg moved slightly. Free for the first time in an unknown number of days. The researcher's hands trembled. He had actually done it. The dragon looked at him, its eyes filled with something he didn't fully understand. Gratitude, maybe, or disbelief, or both. For a moment, neither of them moved. The cold wind blew across the hollow, carrying snowflakes between them. He placed a gentle hand on the ground to steady himself. He could barely believe what had happened. But freeing one band was only the beginning. There were several more restraints, and the other dragons were still trapped. He reached for his tools again, but the sky had grown even darker. Snow began to fall harder. A storm was forming. If he stayed, he risked getting trapped. If he left, he would lose precious time. He looked at the dragons. Their tired eyes followed him again, waiting for his decision. The storm winds picked up speed, swirling the loose snow across the hollow. He knew he needed to return to his camp before visibility dropped. But leaving now felt wrong. They finally had progress. They finally had a chance. He stepped closer to the dragon with a newly freed leg and whispered, "I'll come back. I promise. I won't leave you like this." The dragon blinked slowly, almost as if accepting his words. He gathered his tools with numb fingers, packed everything quickly, and started back toward his camp. The wind pushed against him, whipping snow across his coat. The cold stung his face, but the warmth inside his chest kept him moving. He felt something he hadn't felt since the moment he found them hope. When he reached the ridge and looked back one last time, he saw the dragons through the falling snow, 3 large shapes lying still but watching him. And for the first time, they didn't look like creatures waiting to die. They looked like beings waiting for him to return. He walked into the storm with a quiet determination. Tomorrow. He would free more restraints. Tomorrow. He would try again that tomorrow. Their fight for life would continue, and he would not stop until all of them were free. The storm raged through the night, shaking the walls of his tent and howling across the frozen land like some angry spirit. He barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he pictured the dragons lying out there in the hollow, chained to the ice while the wind cut across their bodies. He wondered if the snow was piling up around them again. He wondered if the cold was sinking deeper into their bones. And more than anything, he wondered if they still believed he would return. When the storm finally loosened its grip and the sky turned into a dull, gray stretch of morning light, he stepped out of his tent. The world around him was buried in snow. His tent was half covered. His footprints from the previous day had completely vanished, and the path to the hollow was nothing but a white blur. The cold stung his skin instantly, but he didn't waste time hesitating. He pulled his coat tighter, slung his tools over his back, and started walking. There was no clear path, so each step felt like a battle. His feet sank into the snow, and the wind pushed him sideways. But he pushed forward, driven by a feeling that was stronger than fear or exhaustion. He had made a promise, and promises meant something out here. When there was no one else, no help, no witnesses, your word was all you had got. By the time he reached the ridge overlooking the hollow, he could barely feel his hands. He stopped to catch his breath and looked down. For a moment, he felt panic rise in his chest. The snow had buried almost everything. The ground was covered in a smooth, white blanket, and the dragons were barely visible, just faint shapes under the snow. Unmoving, he slid down the slope as fast as he could, stumbling at the bottom, and rushed toward them. His heart pounded as he brushed the snow off the largest dragon's wing. The scales beneath were cold, stiff, and covered in frost. For a terrifying moment, he feared the worst. But then, faintly, the dragon's wing twitched. He exhaled a shaky breath. They were alive. Barely, but alive. He moved quickly, brushing more snow off their bodies, clearing the areas around their heads and chests so they could breathe better. The smallest dragon's eyes opened just slightly when he touched its neck, and he saw a dim glow under the frost. They were weak, so weak, but they had waited Dot, and now it was his turn to continue the fight. He took a moment to steady himself, then knelt beside the second dragon's restraints. These bands looked similar to the first one he had unlocked, with strange symbols carved into the metal. He wiped the snow away and touched the patterns. The same soft vibration pulsed through the metal. That was a good sign. It meant these were unlockable too, if he could figure out the right sequence. He studied the symbols closely. His fingers were numb, but he tried to move carefully. Pressing the wrong combination didn't seem dangerous, but it wasted time, and time was something the dragons didn't have much of anymore. He pressed one symbol. Nothing happened. He pressed two together. A faint glow appeared. He pressed three that looked connected by their shape. The band hummed softly, but didn't loosen. He kept trying, his breath fogging the air, his hands trembling, not just from cold, but from fear of failing. The dragon watched him with slow blinks, its eyes heavy but focused on his movements, as if silently urging him not to give up. Minutes turned into hours. The sky remained gray. The cold never softened. And still he pressed, memorized, tested, and tested again. His fingers began to feel clumsy, and his shoulders ached. But he pushed through the discomfort, refusing to slow down. And then, finally, when he pressed a combination that formed a zigzag pattern across the symbols, the restraint shook faintly. A small spark of light traveled across its surface. He pressed the pattern again, this time more firmly. The band clicked Dot. It loosened around the dragon's wing. Releasing a puff of trapped frost Dot, the dragon exhaled a long, deep breath like a sigh that carried weeks of pain and exhaustion. He stepped back and almost smiled. This was progress. Real progress. And seeing the dragon stretch its wing, even a little, filled him with a kind of relief he couldn't explain. But there was still so much more to do. He forced himself to drink some water, then moved to the next restraint. Each dragon had several bands holding them down, and even freeing one part didn't mean they could move safely. Their bodies were stiff, their muscles weakened from being trapped for so long, and the cold made everything harder. He knew he had to keep going at the second dragon. He repeated the entire process. Studying, pressing, waiting for reactions, adjusting, trying sequences again and again. Snow blew across his back. His clothes grew colder. His lashes gathered frost. But he pressed on. When he unlocked the next restraint, the dragon let out a low, soft rumble, not threatening, not loud, just a gentle sound of relief. He placed his hand on the snow beside it, feeling the vibration through the ground. It reminded him that these creatures were alive, feeling, suffering, and trusting him with their lives. That trust gave him strength each time he felt himself slowing down as he worked on the third restraint. The weather shifted again. The sky darkened. The wind picked up. Small flakes of snow swept across the hollow in swirling motions, signaling another storm coming soon. He had to hurry. His fingers were shaking so much by now that he pressed the wrong cymbals twice. He cursed under his breath, not loudly, but enough to release some of the pressure inside him. He took a deep breath, steadied himself, and tried again. This time, when he pressed a cluster of cymbals shaped like small crescents, the band flickered with a blue glow. He pushed the pattern again and heard a faint click. The third band snapped open. The dragon lifted its head slightly, stretching its long neck for the first time since he found it. The movement was slow and weak, but it was movement. That alone felt like victory. He wasn't done yet. The smallest dragon still had several restraints, and he knew its condition was the most delicate. He approached it gently, kneeling beside its wing with the first band set buried under frost. He brushed the ice away carefully, as if touching something fragile. The dragon's eyes opened slowly, glowing dimly. It looked at him in a way that almost felt like a silent conversation. He didn't need words to understand. The creature was asking him to continue, asking him to help it endure just a little longer. He whispered, "I'm here. I won't stop." And he meant it. He began working on the cymbals again. This band seemed more complex. The cymbals were arranged differently, and his first few attempts did nothing. He pressed combinations that normally caused reactions, but this metal stayed silent. The smallest dragon trembled slightly from the cold and exhaustion, and he felt fear build inside him. What if he couldn't unlock this one? What if he had come this far only to fail here? He shook his head, refusing to let the thought take hold. He leaned closer, studying the cymbals more carefully. Then he noticed something. This band had an extra line of cymbals hidden under a layer of ice he had missed earlier. He scraped the frost away and saw a long pattern carved into the metal. It looked almost like a message or a code. He pressed the cymbals in the order they appeared, slowly and carefully. First one, then the next, then the next. Nothing happened. He tried pressing them in reverse order. Still nothing. He tried pressing them in pairs based on their shapes. Again, nothing. The wind grew stronger, and snow piled up against his legs. His fingers were aching so badly that he had to press the cymbals with the side of his hand. He felt frustration build, but he refused to let it win. He took a deep breath and looked at the cymbals again. This time, he noticed something subtle, a tiny scratch between two of the cymbals. It was so faint he could have missed it easily. Maybe the scratch meant something. Maybe it marked where to start. He pressed the cymbal nearest the scratch. A faint glow appeared, so faint he almost didn't see it. His heart jumped. He pressed the next cymbal. The glow strengthened. He pressed the next one. The band hummed softly. Finally, he pressed the last symbol in the sequence. The band opened. The smallest dragon let out a soft sound, almost like a weak breath of relief. It moved its wings slightly, the first sign of freedom it had felt in weeks. He sat back on the snow, exhausted but filled with a powerful calm. 3 dragons now had several restraints removed. Their bodies were still weak, their wings heavy, their strength low, but they were closer to freedom than ever before. The sky above him darkened completely. Snow started falling thicker. The storm was returning. He looked at the dragons, shivering in the cold but alive. He knew he couldn't free all the restraints before the storm hit fully. But he had done enough for the day. More than enough. Progress was real now. Hope was real. He gathered his tools slowly, feeling the weight of exhaustion in every part of his body. As he turned to leave, the largest dragon raised its head slightly and looked at him with an expression he couldn't describe. Not fear, not pain. Something else. Something like trust. And a promise that they would hold on until he returned again. He whispered, "I'll be back tomorrow." The wind carried his words away, but the dragons seemed to understand anyway. He walked back toward his camp through the rising storm, tired beyond measure, but filled with a quiet determination. Tomorrow, he would finish what he started. Tomorrow, he would free them completely. Tomorrow, the frozen prison holding them would break, and he would not stop until it did. The wind settled for the first time in many days, leaving the frozen land strangely quiet. The sky held a soft gray color, as if it too was tired after all the storms that had shaken the coast. The man stood near the last of the metal bindings, his hands numb even inside thick gloves, but he didn't stop. He knew he was close, and he couldn't let the cold break his determination now. The dragons were watching him again, the way they always did whenever he worked on their restraints. Even though their bodies were huge and heavy, their eyes carried a quiet, gentle light that never frightened him. Instead, it reminded him of how much they wanted to live. He pulled at the final piece of metal, using every bit of strength left in his worn body. The tool he held slipped more than once, and the cold kept biting at his skin, but he focused only on the goal in front of him. Behind him, the nearest dragon lowered its head slightly, as if trying to understand what he was doing. It exhaled a warm breath that rolled across the icy ground. Even though the air was freezing, that breath made a thin mist rise from the snow. The man paused to catch his breath. His legs shook, not just from the cold, but from exhaustion that had built up over days without rest. Yet he didn't allow himself to take more than a moment before going back to work. He knew the dragons were counting on him. He didn't know why he cared so deeply about them, but something inside him had decided long ago that he couldn't walk away. Maybe it was because they had no one else. Maybe because saving them gave meaning to his own lonely life in this harsh place. Or maybe it was simply because he couldn't stand the thought of something suffering silently in front of him. The last lock finally snapped. The sharp metallic sound echoed across the frozen coast, louder than he expected in the quiet morning air. He leaned back and breathed out slowly, watching as the final chain fell into the snow. For a moment, everything stood still. The dragons didn't move right away. They looked confused, as if they couldn't believe the cold grip around their bodies was finally gone. Then the nearest one shifted. Its wings trembled slightly, stiff from weeks of being held down. The dragon tried to lift one wing again, slowly and carefully. The icy layer covering its scales cracked and fell away in tiny pieces. It gave a low, soft sound, something between a hum and a sigh. The man couldn't understand the meaning, but he felt the emotion behind it. It was a sound of relief. He stepped back, giving the dragon space. One by one, they began to stretch, their movements unsteady, but growing stronger with each attempt. Their long necks lifted higher. Their wings opened wider, though still slowly, as if they needed time to remember how freedom felt. The man watched, almost afraid to blink in case he missed anything. His heart thumped with a mix of excitement and fear. He wasn't worried about himself. He had never truly felt threatened by them, but he feared that the dragons might be too weak to fly after all the suffering they had gone through. The largest dragon finally spread its wings fully. Even in their weakened state, the wings were huge, creating a dark shadow across the snow. The dragon looked down at the man. Its eyes, bright and deep, held something he couldn't describe. Maybe gratitude, maybe trust, maybe something far more ancient. Whatever it was, it made the man's throat tighten. He had never been looked at like that in his life. Then another dragon lifted its wings. The third followed. Soon, all of them were moving together. They stepped carefully across the snow, their talons making deep marks in the frozen ground. Their bodies radiated a faint warmth, warming the air in small circles around them. The man felt the change in temperature as they came closer, not threateningly, but almost like they were gathering around him with purpose. He didn't move. He didn't even think of running. He stood quietly, letting the moment unfold. The dragons surrounded him in a loose circle, their wings slightly raised. They weren't closing him in. They were protecting the center where he stood. The wind had picked up again, but now he felt nothing. The dragons blocked the cold with their bodies, creating a strange shelter around him. He understood then that this was their way of saying goodbye. One dragon lowered its head until it was close to his. Its breath, warm and steady, touched his face. The man reached out, slowly, unsure if touching would be allowed. When his hand rested lightly on the dragon's cold scale, the creature didn't pull away. Instead, it closed its eyes for a moment, as if accepting the gesture fully. The scale felt solid and rough under his glove, but there was a soft vibration beneath it, a heartbeat or some inner energy he couldn't name. He stepped back slowly as the dragons began to prepare for flight. Their wings lifted higher, catching the air in long, slow movements. Snow swirled around their legs, rising into the air as the wind built under them. The sound of their wings was powerful, but not violent. It felt like listening to the sea, returning after a long silence. One dragon rose first, its body lifting smoothly from the ground. It hovered for a moment, staying close to the man as if waiting for the others. The second followed, then the third. The final dragon, the one that had been most injured, took a moment longer. Its wings shook halfway up, and the man's heart clenched. But then it tried again, this time with more strength, and finally lifted off the ground. Together, they formed a pattern above him, circling once in a slow, graceful arc. Their shadows moved across the snow like passing clouds. The man looked up, barely breathing, feeling the cold on his face, but warmth inside his chest. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He simply watched, knowing this moment didn't need words. The dragons turned toward the open sky. Their bodies glowed faintly as they flew higher, light forming along the edges of their wings. That glow spread like soft fire, bright enough to stand out against the gray sky, but gentle enough to feel comforting. As they climbed, the glow left thin, shining trails behind them. The trails faded slowly, like stars disappearing at dawn. The man kept looking up long after the dragons had vanished into the clouds. His breath came out in slow, misty clouds. He felt something heavy inside him, but it wasn't sadness. It was something far more complex: relief, pride, wonder, and a strange sense of connection to something far beyond his world. He had no idea where the dragons would go, or if he would ever see them again. But he knew he had done the right thing. He walked back across the ice, his steps light even though the cold still bit at his legs. The chains lay scattered behind him, covered in snow. The land around him looked the same as before, frozen, harsh, empty, but he felt different. The silence felt welcoming now, not lonely. Even the clouds above seemed softer, as if holding some secret warmth the world had forgotten. When he reached his small shelter, he looked back one last time. The sky was completely clear where the dragons had flown. There was no sign of them now, no trace of their glowing trails. But he didn't need proof. He felt their presence still, not in the sky, but in his memory. For the first time in a long while, he smiled. It was a small smile, but a real one. He didn't know what he would do next, but he knew one thing for sure. Saving them had changed him. It had shown him that even in the coldest places, kindness could create warmth strong enough to melt through anything. He closed the door of the shelter behind him, letting the soft sound echo in the quiet air. Outside, the frozen land stretched endlessly. Inside, he felt a new sense of peace. And far above, somewhere beyond the clouds, the dragons flew free, carrying the memory of the human who had refused to leave them behind.